congratulations. You're also serving as an executive producer for the film. And I went over to your social media this morning before we spoke, and you mentioned that this was a story 17 years in the making. What was the road like to finally get this moment in history greenlit for you and being able to tell the story with all of this information that people were not privy to during that time?
Well, the one thing that people don't realize is this brawl thing went on for like 10 years, right? The criminal part of it, and then we had an onslaught of civil suits that we had to go through. So we had a muzzle put on us, right? From the time that it happened, from the night that it happened, we could not speak about it. And that was one that was very, very intense. For me, I can't speak for Ron, I can't speak for Jack, but it was very intense for me because I'm in the prime of my career, and at least going into the prime of my career, and having narratives be created about me from many people that had never even had a conversation with me or don't even know what even happened, right? They're just piggybacking off of these looped, clips that's on, SportsCenter, right? That was hard for me. So once we got past the 10-year mark, once everything got done, and believe it or not, I had a felony on my record, as if I shot or stabbed somebody, literally. It became more then on how do I tell the story of what happened, because people have taken stabs at it where so I think maybe a 30 for 30 or something like that, and a couple other docs, but it didn't have the level of people that was involved in this doc, and that's one thing we wanted to work really hard on, is having people talk candidly and openly about that night, so people can understand. And even for myself, I was always irritated, when this anniversaries come up, because so much was lost, so much was impacted. My league was under fire, and my peers as well that had nothing to do with that night. And all of a sudden, people started, talking about, our liking of our music, how we wear our hair, tattoos, basically cultural issues. So I wanted to put together a doc, and it was really perfect timing. Shout out to Netflix, the Way brothers, Floyd Russ, who's a phenomenal director who did an unbelievable job of doing a doc that didn't alienate a league that I feel so passionate about, the Indiana Pacers, and my peers, right? Detroit Pistons as well, from a team perspective. But most importantly as well, do a doc that wasn't for the avid NBA fan, because every NBA fan knows about that night, right? But do a doc for the person that I'm walking into on a daily basis, whether it's in board meetings or meetings in general public, that doesn't watch the NBA, but has a perception of who I am based off what they saw on TV, right? By some of the most renowned journalists in the business that talked about thug and criminals and hoodlums and all of the other stuff.
Mm-hmm. What was very fascinating to me, there were a lot of things that I learned that I didn't know at the time, didn't have what we have now, camera angles, the ability to pull these things quickly. Prior to this incident, the Detroit Pistons, the Palace in general, had already had sort of a reputation during the previous era and the Rodman era when they all played, that they were the bad boys. So it was always sort of something with the Palace. Whenever you went as a player to the Palace with the Pacers to play there, prior to that, was there a sense of kind of foreboding or even just going into that building in general, even prior to this incident?
No, I took it as just an intense rivalry that fans are very passionate about. I enjoyed playing there. It was intense. It wasn't for the lighthearted, but I didn't personally have it. I think every arena is going to have somewhat of an issue because there's a lot of, when you drink and you come to games, many people live their lives through sports because that's kind of their safe haven, right? When they're going through, whatever they're going through on a personal basis, they're able to lean on sports as the tool to make them feel good. And in some cases, when the team doesn't win, it's going to make them feel bad. So I didn't, it wasn't like, it wasn't, any worse than to me than any other arena that we went into, far as people being vocal towards us. I actually just personally enjoyed it, but um, the rivalry itself, I think the problem that we had was that people thought that the players hated each other,
Mm.
right? And didn't know that many of us were really good friends, as if go on vacation and hang out, and kids and families and stuff hang out with each other. But in that era, it was either you or me on the court, right? So you could never tell who was friends, right? And so I think, when those fans fed into that, meanness, hard fouls, just all out competing, they thought that was a level of nastiness towards each other. So they bought into that.
Mhm. That's interesting that you bring that up, because that's a big thing in professional wrestling too. You never could see the wrestlers together because it was part of the story, and it would ruin the story if you
Mhm.
saw them hanging out and having beers or whatnot. Now players are very clear about their friendships outside of the team. How do you think that, before we talk about the details of the documentary, how do you think that's affected the game in the general, that people are now privy to the fact that, yeah, you might be friends with Jack and you might be battling in a pickup game, but afterwards you're going to go have a beer and have a good time and spend time with each other? Has that changed, do you think, the intensity of the game from the fan perspective, or was it better when people just didn't know who was friends and who wasn't?
I think it did change the intensity a little bit. I think it changed the intensity amongst players too. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. It's just an era thing, to
Mhm.
me. I think the league itself now is as big as it's ever been, right? People are watching the games. It's an international game now at the highest level that we've ever seen. So I hear people always talk about, man, I just can't watch it because everybody's too friendly, right?
Mm.
Well, those are the people that are used to watching those different eras. But I would probably think that, the average fan that just really started watching, that's all they know. So they're okay with that. Right. And so I think it's a mix of a lot of things, but ultimately, for me as a player, as an alumni of the NBA, I think the league is great. I think they're doing great things. And I don't have anything negative to say about it, because it's allowed me to live a dream and do things that I, as a young fella in the inner city, couldn't believe that I would be doing, like having a documentary on Netflix and many other things that I do.
Yeah, now they say you live your ancestors' wildest dreams, and then here you are,
Yeah.
executive producing, and not just being the subject of the documentary, actual being on the business side of it, which is fantastic, and a story all in its own. So as I watched the documentary, there were two pivotal things that stuck out to me. I think the mention of Jamal Tinsley telling Ron Artest that he could go get his foul. And I think of the guy in the stands, John Green, who threw the first beer. That kind of was the catalyst of it all. When you look back now, seeing the documentary yourself, and you look at those two incidents, what do you think? The beer throwing was obviously the catalyst for the whole brawl that took place in the palace. But when you look at Jamal mentioning to Ron about getting his file, where does that play into the scheme of how the event even started?
I don't know. As far as Jamal, again, for people that are going to watch this doc, when we filmed this, we didn't film it together. So, I heard the Jamal thing from Jack on the actual doc, the rough cut when we were going through it. So, you know, that's a part of kind of the competitive thing, right? No, I would think when Jamal said it, he wouldn't have thought that it would have led into what it led into, right? So, I kind of push that aside. For the John Green situation, I go back to how fans, align themselves with teams, right? And so, Ben Wallace, even when Ben was throwing all of the headbands and armbands and stuff at Ron, what people didn't see was it was other things being thrown too,
Mhm.
right? And I can almost guarantee you, knowing what I know about Ben didn't think that that was going to erupt into a malice or this thing that they're going to be talking about 17 years later. Um, but I guess John Green thought that it was okay to throw an entire beer on somebody, right? Which, um, probably the one thing that bothered me the most, and the he wasn't very sensitive even afterwards about what happened. Right, he just started, laughing and joking about it. That one cup changed everything. But I think you have to take it a step further of trying to understand mental health, right? And I go back to Ron. Um, I was blown away hearing Ron talk about his process, how he handled pressure, how he handled everything that was coming at him on a day-to-day basis. And when I look at him talk about his 5 count, and I think back at the night of what happened, right? There's 3 stages of it, right? Ben Wallace pushes him by his neck, which starts the motor.
Mhm.
He then goes to the scores table and lays down. Ben throws something else. He jumps back up, right? His motor's now starting to speed up more, right? Then lays back down, right? He's trying to get it. Then he's into his 5 count. The cup of beer comes, and it's already a it's already a pot of water already boiling at the hottest levels, and then it boils over, right? Then he loses it, right? I thought he did a great job on speaking about that. And honestly, from my perspective, it made me emotional, right? And I've watched the doc 10 times. I'm not even lying, like 10 times I watched that doc. Because a part of me feels like if I knew more about mental health at the time, the way I know about it now, right? It's upfront, it's in your face. We just dealt with it in the Olympics, and in tennis, and all over the place. Kevin Love in basketball. I could have been a better teammate. I could have been a better brother. Right? I could have figured out ways to bring him in versus like, bro, like, what are you doing all the time, right? And that's the one that I just kind of look back all the time now and think about. Maybe I could have did some things differently to help him.
Right. By the same token, we weren't equipped with what to call it then, at
Right.
least in the Black community. It's still a stigma in the Black community to talk about mental health and mental toughness. As a person, be a member of the team, you all go out, all of you go out every night, and you hear the fans and just the boos and the cheers. You're accustomed to that as an athlete, but all of the other extra things that have nothing to do with the game that take its toll. From your own perspective, you were very active, very young coming into the league, and you were just always a focus driven person. How did you manage those same feelings? Ron has his own personality, his own issues that stem from, but how did you manage that yourself in that environment, the boos, the cheers, the yays, the nays, and all of the other things that require mental toughness when you play a sport at this level?
Honestly, going to Portland right out of high school, and I gotta say a huge thank you to the Portland Trailblazers organization, the late great Paul Allen and his family, who was fully prepared for a 17-year-old out of high school that didn't know much about really much, to be honest. Didn't know how to be a pro, didn't know how to be a professional, didn't know how to, bring what I need to bring to the table on a day-to-day basis to extend my career. And they were very prepared. So all the things that I learned through the 4 years of just watching many of my teammates, good, bad, and ugly, prepared me for those moments, right? I became thirsty for opportunity, which comes with environments like that, right? Tough arenas, booing, okay, being, for me, being talked about as if I made a bad decision coming out of high school, right? Not knowing the work that I'm putting in, but just wasn't getting an opportunity. So I always had this little bit of a chip on my shoulder. So when I went to arenas, it was like, let me show you what I've been working on, right? And so it didn't necessarily matter what they were saying. It was like, okay, I have a chance to quiet the arena, so this is going to be my approach. And I enjoyed every minute, even when it didn't even go right, right? It was more like, this is a part of the process, and this is how I deal with it.
Mhm. Now you're on the other side of the incident, and even watching the footage, is 3 central figures aside from Ben Wallace and the fans. But in terms of the Pacers, there's you, there is Ron Artest, and there's Steven Jackson, who are made like the focal point of the. I never knew what was the rest of the team doing. Where were the other Pacers? Because even when you look at the footage, there's so many people who are swarming the court and fans and security and all of you. Where's the rest of the team while this is going on?
Some of them were in the stands trying to help. Like it was, and some were just. I mean, honestly, I couldn't tell you. Somebody asked me this earlier today about Jeff Foster and Austin Crozier. I don't know, right? It was just so many people everywhere and so much craziness happening all at once. It was like, and once they breached the court, that's when I knew we were in trouble, right? Because at that point, you've never seen that or heard of anything like that, where you have fans now that are lining you up, like whether it was spitting on us or throwing water bottles or trying to snatch our jerseys off of us, or in my case, a guy jumped around and put his arm around my neck and tried to choke slam me. And people don't really necessarily know that because they wasn't shown all the camera angles. They only see me running and punching somebody, not knowing that I had just slammed somebody on the table, and happened to look left and see a teammate who, by the way, was in street clothes in a brown suit. So if you look at the slide and punch, you'll see the guy trying to get off the floor in a brown suit with a cast on his hand. That the Haddad kid a guy that I hit was standing over, right? So people don't see that, right? They never saw that. People don't understand what that means. They just say, okay, well, the narrative is the players are beating up the fans, and this is who they are, right? And I was able to, and a lot of people don't know this, I was able to take the NBA to court. It was an unfortunate situation. You never want to do anything like that, but I felt like what I did, I had the right to do, right? And a federal judge, after going through arbitration, we finally got to a federal judge, and we all know how hard it is to get through arbitration. You're trying to, get through a suit. Say that I had the right to do what I did because he saw all 28 camera angles. He saw everything leading up into it that you guys wasn't awarded to see, right? And to a point, honestly, I knew that it was a price to pay. I just didn't understand once the toxic part of it started to fade, it was never anything else said, right? It was never, you won the civil cases, you got all the criminal stuff. It was no rebuttal. It's just like this anniversary every year of us hitting fans, right? And that was probably the one that hurt me the most, because some of the people I respect the most in the journalist community really went wild on us, right? Really went wild. I mean, it's shocking to me. And I think that's what makes me emotional watching that doc every time, that the people just really didn't even do their homework, or didn't choose to do their homework, or come back to revisit the things that they said to say, okay, well, you know what? I was wrong.
And it gave birth, it didn't give birth, but the labels that follow thugs and this and that and all these things that categorize you, but not using the same terminology for these fans that breached the court, that were in the melee. They're just, these fans who are there, these poor fans, and these millionaire athletes are just beating them up for no reason whatsoever. Now with the documentary coming out, is this like a cathartic moment for you? Do you feel redemption? How do you feel now that we have all the information? Because we know any redemptive act, like your lawsuits, all these things, they go below the fold. No one reads about them. No one hears about them unless they specifically, it doesn't get the same media attention as the drama does. Now with this documentary, is it redemption? How do you feel now that we get to see everything?
I don't know if it's redemption, right? It's more of now you just get to have the conversation, right? It is a hard pill to swallow when you work your butt off to position yourself, not only on the court, amongst your peers and in your league, but in your communities, right? When you got to go have a conversation, or people in question about who you are as a person, when you worked your tail off to position yourself and you know who you are, and for it to be almost tattooed on you, right? I'm okay, because some people are never going to change their opinion anyway. The only difference is now that I've had an opportunity to tell my story, which is the truth, right? It's coming out of my mouth and it's coming out of many other people's mouth that was there. And now at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, if somebody comes up to me, I'm in Las Vegas 2 weeks ago coaching my son's team, an 8th grade game, and it's at least 10 plus people have asked me about the brawl.
Mm.
And so now all I can say now is, instead of sitting there talking about it, hey, go to Netflix, check out the doc, it'll tell you everything you need to know. And I can now move on, because I am sick and tired of them doing these anniversaries and these recaps of the stuff, right? We want to move on. The story is told. Let's bury it and let us move on with our lives.
That the perfect segue. That was the last thing I was going to ask you. So now we have all this information. Will you continue to entertain conversations about this at all? Stephen Jackson's made it very clear in the doc. He ain't answering. Don't ask him. He's not talking about it any longer. But you do work with young athletes, and as a mentor, as a coach, do you use anything from the documentary to further inform your players, or how would this now fit into your coaching techniques, the way you go about educating, mentoring, and young athletes? How will this factor into it?
Well, it's been factoring. I've lived this thing forever, right? And so the one thing about my 18 years, I've really enjoyed, the good, the bad, and different, whatever it may be. I've really enjoyed that process, because now I get to use tools that was given to me as a youngster from the, Xavier McDaniel, Tyrone Corbett, Alex English, who are from where I'm from. I now get to use the same tools that I now went through, things I learned as a youth, and give it to people. Cade Cunningham, who just got drafted #1, is from my program as well. Drew Timmy, who's at Gonzaga, RJ Hampton, who's drafted last year, Tyrese Maxey, Jermaine Ramsey, all kids that were in our program who are now in the NBA or getting ready to go to the NBA, been able to impact. And that's what this is about, right? Lessons learned, right? I tell kids all the time, and I tell parents, opportunity isn't given to everybody, right? But when you get it, you have to understand how to use it. And when things come up, you have to learn how to and know how to address it. And that's really what this is about to me. The doc itself is to put everything to bed. I'm not having any more, conversation about it. I think I'm supposed to do a day after press run on it, but I'm not even sure if I'm gonna do that at this point. I just wanted to get it in people's faces and they can hear from me. And then now I'm moving with my life.
Mhm. Well, I think this is a marvelous documentary. It's such a pivotal moment in sports history. It shines a lot of light of what athletes are experiencing now about mental health awareness and self-preservation. So bravo for continuing to move the conversation and the culture where people can learn from. And I thank you for this time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.